Hello YouTube, my name is Titan Lord and I am creating the definitive, the ultimate, the greatest project ever committed or ever created in Historic Brawl ever for YouTube. The Grand Historic Brawl tier list. I'm going to be ranking all, and I do mean all, of the commanders that currently exist within the format. It's my favorite format. I've been looking for videos like this all over on YouTube, and I couldn't really find any. And I know there's some tier lists that exist within like the Brawl Hub space. They have some that's like a paper document, but that is so much less interesting than a video format to me. I am going to do it in sections of color identity. So today we're starting with mono white. And next video will probably be Woodward order, so blue, then black, then red, then green, and then I'm gonna go through all the color pairs and all the 3 color pairs, and then get to the 4 and 5 color decks as well as the colorless. But that's how it's gonna be organized. I was initially gonna do it as one big video, but it would take me way too long to get it done, and I want to start getting the ball rolling because it'll honestly, I think doing it this way will actually keep me motivated to keep this series going. But this is going to be an ongoing series. Hopefully 1 episode a week, maybe 2 if I have the time, but no promises. There is a slight, I need to put a little caveat. You will notice for at least the monocolor rankings, I haven't gone through all the 2 color pairs yet, there is going to be a bit of a heavy bias on negativity. Now, I don't want to be somebody who's just out here, like, promoting, like, this kind of negative vibe, saying, all these commanders suck and you should only play these. That's not what I'm here for. That's not my intent. But a lot of commanders in Historic Brawl that exist, especially the monocolored ones like I mentioned, they aren't really designed to be commanders. They weren't designed for Brawl. Some of them are commanders that are obviously meant for, like, the commander format, but that doesn't translate as well to a 1v1 in some scenarios. And otherwise, it's just like some of these are limited in 60 card constructed cards that they might be fine cards, they might be very good cards, but doesn't necessarily make them good commanders. We're probably going to see the average placement of a commander go up as we get to the 2 and 3 color decks. But for now, you know, you can you'd be a little upset at me for being negative, but again, I'm not here to promote negativity. I'm just here to give my opinion. Also, I should double down. This is my opinion. You're going to disagree with me, and you got to be okay with that. Feel free to. Ooh, I just smacked my desk. Feel free to disagree with me and state your opinions in the comments. I'm glad to have a conversation about some of these. I am definitely not the most knowledgeable about some of these. I can't say that I've played every single Historic Brawl commander. Not nearly. There's over 1,000. I think there's like 91. Emil the Blessed shouldn't be here, by the way. That was a mistake on my part. There's a lot. There's like 90 of these alone. So there's no way I can play them all. But I have been playing competitive Historic Brawl for over a year now. And I think I know enough about the format to really gauge which cards are good or not. Now, okay, so the way I'm going to be ranking these cards today is, you know, S is obviously the best of the best, best in class, absolutely just top tier, like nuts, like play this commander if you want to get some very good and solid wins. A is obviously just below that, maybe not the best, but still solid. You're going to pick up a lot of wins with them. B tier is like, this is where you get to the commanders that are a little more like maybe a little lacking in some regions. Might have some good matchups if you want to play this in a competitive scene to consider. C tier is a little niche, like either there's not enough to really make this commander like unique, but maybe it's got a couple of strengths, maybe some random matchups it's like randomly good against that maybe you'd want to play it in a competitive scene, which is how I am ranking these, is kind of like not in their hell queue, but how, if we were to play one giant massive tournament, like how well I think these cards would kind of have a chance to do in that said tournament. D is like, this is where a lot of like cards that are like good cards on their own, but there's no reason to build around them, right? Like C and B, you might at least have some synergies that are good enough to try to build around, but it just kind of doesn't work out. D tier is like, these are solid cards, but they're not
good commanders for the most part. F tier is just like, don't play this. F tier is, hey, this card is not good at what it does. Maybe it has a poor stat line. Maybe it's trying to do something that's just bad. And it would actively be a waste of time to try to brew this. With all that rambling out of the way, let's get started. And first we're going to start out with Adeline Resplendent Cathar. Adeline is an X4th Vigilance, where her power is equal to the number of creatures you control. Whenever you attack with F Adelines on the battlefield, you will create a tapped and attacking 1/1 human creature token. This is a very, very powerful commander. This is probably the, if not the, one of the best aggro commanders in the entire format. This has seen competitive success in the Brawl Hub scene, and is very good to grind and get quick daily wins in the play queue. I would place her up in S tier as one of the absolute best commanders in the entire format. Super resilient. There's a lot of very, very good threats in mono whites to both protect your other cards and get a lot of damage in early. That makes this just sing. This is the absolute, in my opinion, the absolute best mono white commander. It's probably all downhill from here. Adeline is fantastic. Okay, next commander we're going to be talking about is Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants. 4 mana Planeswalker with 4 loyalty. Its plus puts a 1/1 counter on each of the 2 target creatures. The minus returns target creature with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yes, I'm reading this off of Arena on my phone. And the -7 is you get an emblem at the beginning of your end step, create 3 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. Not a bad card. This fits into a good number of decks. Like, it's pretty solid in an call, for example. But as a commander, I don't think it does enough to really be worth building a deck around it. The ultimate is not that good, and it's tough to ultimate. The minus is pretty decent, and the plus is pretty good for making your board stronger. But I think there's just a lot of better options that we're going to go over. I'm going to place this in C tier for now. I might change this later. Alright, and our third commander for today is Ajani, Inspiring Leader. It is a 6 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker, plus 2 reads, gain 2 life, put 2 1/1 counters on up to 1 target creature. -3 exile target creature. Its controller gains 2 life, sorry. And its -10 is creatures you control gain flying and double strike until end of turn. I'm going to slap this card in F tier. It's not that strong of a card. It's too expensive. 6 mana for only 5 loyalty is fine. It does go up to 7 the turn you play it. And it does buff something on your board immediately. I didn't even go as far as saying having a minus as a removal spell is very, very good. But the problem is you're putting all that on a 6 mana planeswalker that doesn't have an ultimate that's really worth building around. And it's just outclassed by like any other like mono white mid-range or mono white control deck. It's just gonna put this thing to shame, and it's really not worth the 6 mana that you invest into it. All right, and next up we have Ajani, Strength of the Pride. It is a 4 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker. Its +1 reads. Whenever you gain life equal to the number of creatures that you control, plus the number of planeswalkers you control. -2 reads, create a 2/2 white creature token that gets a 1/1 counter every time you gain life. You know, an Ajani's Pridemate. I think it's called Ajani's Pridemate, right? Yeah, it's even named Ajani's Pridemate, sorry. And then it has an interesting 0 ability. If you have 15 or more than your starting life total, you get to exile Ajani and each artifact and creature your opponents control. Now, this is an interesting case. I really don't think, and this is going to be a theme you're going to notice, I don't like life gain decks. I think life gain decks are a trap. I don't think they're worth building into. And I really don't think they're very good against anything other than the random aggro deck that you run into. So for that reason, you're going to see me rank a lot of these life gain commanders pretty low. That said, Ajani is one of your stronger options for that. I think there's one other card that I'll go over that I think is like okay. But I think that card is better than Ajani. I think if you're going to be playing life gain, a Johnny is great in your 99, but I wouldn't put him as the commander. Okay, next up we have a Johnny Wise Counselor. A Johnny Wise Counselor is a 5 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker with the +2 that says you gain 1 life for each creature you control. A -3 that reads you creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. And a -9 that says put X 1/1 counters on target creature where X is your life total. This is going to be another F tier. These kind of expensive planeswalkers that don't impact the board when they come down that much. Well, I guess this one's minus can, like, you know, come down to be an Anthem effect to swing through for damage. I guess maybe that actually puts it in D tier, but the plus really doesn't do anything. And again, not high on life gain. I definitely think it's worse than the previous Ajani we talked about. Probably stay away from this commander. Okay, next up we have Anafenza Kintree Spirit. She reads, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you will bolster 1. Bolster 1 is you put a 1/1 counter on the creature with or tied with the lowest toughness. I believe she's also, yeah, she's a 2/2. This is a very solid, I think is a pretty solid commander. Not a ton of representation in the competitive sphere, because this is a case of, like, not a bad commander, but just outclassed by your other aggro options. For that reason, I am going to put it in B tier. I think it's a much better commander than the other 4 down here that we've talked about so far. But I also don't think there's really a reason to play this over something like Adeline. However, still a very strong card. Probably very fun build around if you want to build more towards the counters. And you're probably going to have a lot of fun playing it. Alright, and next up we have Ow, the Dawn Sky. I think that's how you pronounce it. I've heard a couple of different pronunciations. Ow, the Dawn Sky is a 5 mana, 5/4 flyer with Vigilance. Whenever it dies, you get to either look at the top 7 cards and put any number of non-land permanent cards with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest, at the bottom. Or you get to put, sorry, I'm reading this off on my phone, 2 1/1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or vehicle. So this is a commander that I feel like there's a lot of removal in the format. There's a lot of black removal. There's a lot of white removal spells that don't exile now. They destroy, like Get Lost, Fateful Absence, Destroy Evil, that kind of stuff. All the stuff that this dies to. It trades very well with that. However, I don't think that necessarily constitutes to a strong commander. There's really not much to build around with this commander, and it's pretty good in a lot of decks, but not a good commander. For that very reason, I'm going to stick it in D tier. Alright, going on next, we have Archangel Elspeth. Archangel Elspeth is a 4 mana, 4 loyalty planeswalker with a +1 that reads, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. A -2 that reads, put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control and it becomes an angel and gains flying. And then the ultimate reads, -6, return all non-land permanent cards with mana value of 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is an interesting commander. If you want to build like a mono white like token or mid-range deck, I think this is kind of solid. But saying that, it hasn't seen much competitive representation in the Brawl Hub sphere, so I'm not super confident with it. I'm going to stick it in C tier. Alright, and our next commander is going to be a Baird. I think it's called Baird. Baird, Steward of Argive. A 4 mana, 2/4 with Vigilance. Already not starting out great. Creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller plays 1 for each of their creatures. This ability is useless and it's a bad stat line. This obviously isn't designed around this format. I'm going to stick Baird in F tier and we're going to move on. Alright, moving on. Bazri-Ket is a 3 mana, 3 loyalty planeswalker with the +1 that reads, put a 1/1 counter up to 1 target creature you control. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Starting off pretty good. -2 that reads, whenever one or more creatures attack this turn, create that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. And a -6 that reads, you get an emblem at the beginning of your upkeep, or at the beginning of combat, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Everything about this commander is pretty good. This reminds me very similarly of kind of the Elspeth we just talked about, but honestly, I think it's better. It doesn't plus to add to the board, which is like with an actual token, which is a bit of a downside. And its token doesn't have lifelink, but it can create a lot more tokens in a single attack step, and it's always protecting one of your threats that wants to push through. This might be a controversial take. I might actually stick Bazri in A tier. The fact that it's not a creature for an aggressive strategy, now that I'm thinking about it, actually kind of hurts it for me. I'm going to stick it back in B tier. I don't know how many cards are going to end up in A tier. Let's see if we can find some. Alright, next up we have the other Basri, Devoted Paladin. 6 mana for 4 loyalty, not starting out good. +1, put a 1/1 counter on when creature you control gains vigilance till end of turn. So already we have an immediately worse version of the card we just talked about. -1 over creature control attacks, put a 1/1 counter on it, and a -6 creatures gain +2/+2 and flying until end of turn. This is a bad card, bad rate. For both its plus and its minus, you never don't touch this card. This is a card that is super inefficient in every way. Designed for, I'm pretty sure, one of those pre-constructed decks that don't touch this card. And next we have Bill the Pony. I didn't know this card existed. I'm not familiar with all the Lord of the Rings cards, lore, characters. Never seen the movies. Anyways, it is a 4-mana 1/4. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you create 2 food tokens. You can sacrifice a food to make a creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Mono white food, big butts tribal. Yeah. Sorry, Bill. Alright, and next up we have Boromir, Watcher of the Tower. Boromir is a 3-mana, 3/3 vigilance creature with, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Interesting line of text. Sacrifice Boromir. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. The ring tempts you. This is another one of those cards where it's like, it's a good card. You could put this in a command zone. Really not sure where you would. But it's at least a solid rate of 3/3 vigilance is pretty good. And I guess if you're worried about free spells, I don't think that line of text is super relevant. But having a way to protect your board in the command zone is nice. That being said, I think it's very much outclassed by probably all of these commanders that are just a little bit more impactful. So I'm going to go ahead and stick it in D tier. Alright, next up we have Bruna, the Fading Light. Bruna, the Fading Light reads, whenever you cast a spell, you may return target human or non-human creature, or angel or human creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And it's a 5/7 with flying and vigilance. If you really want to run, it also flips to meld. If you really want to do the meld thing, cool. This is way too expensive for what it does. I'm going to have to stick this in F tier. Alright, next up we have Captain Eberhart. Captain Eberhart is a 1/2 double striker with spells cast from among cards you drew this turn cost 1 less to cast, and spells cast from among cards your opponents drew this turn cost 1 more to cast. Interesting card. It's a nice little bit of reduction if you want to just be top ticking and slapping down threats. For that reason, I'm actually going to stick this in C tier. It is a solid creature. It's a pretty decent 2-drop if you want to play it as the pilot of an aggro deck. But I think it's a little bit outclassed, I think, and offense adding to the board is more relevant. Adeline is just like way better than this card. It's pretty good in both of these decks, but worth at least trying. So I'm going to put it in C tier. Alright, and next up we have Cerise, Slayer of Fear. Cerise, Slayer of Fear is a 5-mana 5/5 with First Strike and Lifelink, starting off pretty strong. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you gain life this turn, seek a card with the highest mana value among cards in your library with mana value less than or equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. So Seek does not put the card onto the battlefield, it puts it on your hand. Cool, got it. This is an okay card. I don't mind this card. I don't mind seeing this card around. It's a solid enough for its rate. Like, for its rate, it's a very strong, presence on the battlefield. And it does do something kind of impactful. You don't really need to have, you're obviously playing the life gain strategy, which I'm not high on. But this one gives you card advantage, and it doesn't need you to have a whole bunch of stuff going on for its trigger to work, because it is a 5/5 lifelink with First Strike to start. So I think that's worth mentioning. I'm going to put it above the other life gain strategies, but still not too high. I think the max I would put this is in C tier. Probably part of me still wants to put this in D tier because it is 5 mana. I don't know if I want to put it above a Johnny. These aren't in any particular order. And next up we have Danica Capuchin, Paragon. She is a 3 mana 2/2 with first rank, vigilance, and lifelink, so pretty decent. And aura and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Pretty solid card all around. As the commander of a deck, though, not huge on it. It's nice to have. I think there's much better options for a equipment kind of commander. I don't think I'm quite like, obviously you want to equip everything to this, but it only starts out as a 2/2. Not super high on it. Probably gonna throw it down here indeed. Alright, moving on to the next card. Oh look, another Danitha. Danitha, Banalia's Hope. 5 mana 4/4, first strike, vigilance, lifelink, so the same keywords as before. But this one reads, whenever it enters the battlefield, you may put an aura or equipment card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield attached to Danitha. Solid card, not amazing commander. Much like, I'm gonna be quick with this one, much like the last card I just discussed, it's fine, but there's much better options. I wouldn't recommend playing this. For that reason, I'm gonna slap it in D tier. Okay, next card up is going to be Daxos, Blessed by the Sun. Daxos' toughness is equal to your devotion to whites. Whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, gain 1 life. I'm probably gonna stick this. This is either C or D. Again, life gain, but it is a enabler in your command zone for only 2 mana. So that is at least worth mentioning. I feel like it's definitely better than Cerise, because Cerise is just so expensive. Now, all it does is gain you life, and it is a big body for a pretty big blocker. You know what? I think I'm convincing myself. Because it is cheap, because it could be a pretty decent blocker to jump aggressive threats, and because it does at least give you that enabler in the command zone, one of the better life gain commanders, I will reluctantly put this in C tier. Alright, next card is Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite. The biggest and most expensive Elesh Norn, the most classic version of the card, obviously being the oldest. A 7 mana 4/7 vigilance. Other creatures you control get +2/+2, and creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. This thing wins games on its own. If you get to cast this commander, you probably win. If not that turn, then the turn after. That being said, 7 mana is a lot to ask for. I'm going to have to knock it a lot for that. You're going to be a mono-white kind of mid-ranger control deck that uses this as your finisher if you're going to be playing this card as your commander. I don't know if that's necessarily the most supported archetype, and for that reason, I'm probably just going to have to stick this in... Sorry, it feels weird, but I'm going to have to put it in D tier. It's just too expensive. Alright, next up we have the next Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. I can't wait to talk about this one. 5 mana, 4/7 vigilance, same stat line as before, as you'll see with the next one, I believe, as well. Vigilance, if a permanent, so doubles your ETBs and kills all of your opponents. Do I put this in A tier, is the question. This is definitely a very good card, and this is a very good commander. I think minimum, this is a B, right? It makes me think if I want to put Anafenza up to A, because I do feel like Anafenza sticks out a little bit. But, if you want to play a just super grindy, super value-centric mid-range deck that absolutely shuts down everything your opponent wants to do, or at least half of what they want to do, this is fantastic. 5 mana, fantastic option, sorry. 5 mana, 4/7 vigilance is a pretty decent rate. Like, this thing is going to block for days. You can't attack into this, and it's a pretty good attacker, too. And it just does so much for you. I think I'm going to keep it in B tier, though. I am going to promote Anafenza. Okay, moving on, we have the last Elesh Norn is a 3/5, so I was wrong about the stat line previously. 4 mana, 3/5 with vigilance. Whenever a source and opponent control deals damage to you or a permanent you control, that player's controller loses 2 life unless they pay 1. Interesting ability. And it has the ability to sacrifice their creatures for 3 mana and flip itself. And it has... Okay, the saga for this card is called the Argent Etchings after you flip it. Chapter 1, incubate 2 5 times, then transform all incubator tokens you control. Chapter 2,
Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain double strike till end of turn. Chapter 3, destroy all other permanents except for artifacts, lands, and Phyrexians. Exile the Argent Etchings, return it to the battlefield face up. So you get the Storm back. This is a cool commander conceptually. Like, I'm sure there's a deck for this. I'm sure this is a good commander for a decent deck. I just think there's way better options. I'm going to stick this in C tier. Good rate. Very annoying effect statically. And the flip side of this is very powerful. I just don't know how often you're going to get to do everything and get all the value you can from this card. Alright, next card we have Elspeth Resplendent. She is a 5 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker. +1 rates, choose up to 1 target creature, put a +1/+1 counter and a counter from among flying, first strike, lifelink, or vigilance on it. So super buffs a creature for the +1. -3, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from among them. Put it on the battlefield with a shield counter on it, which means if it would take damage or get destroyed, you instead remove the shield counter. And its -3 is to create 5 3/3 white angel creature tokens with flying. Pretty solid commander. Is it the best Elspeth we've talked about? Is it better than the other one? It probably is. The fact that this thing immediately comes down and has another permanent attached with it, you can like immediately grab something to defend and block for this planeswalker for 1 turn, and then buff it, and like give it a really big buff the next turn, and then keep adding to your board. I like this. This might be a hair controversial. I think it might be... The ultimate is very, very good. Don't underestimate the ultimate. You want to stick this in B tier. This might be a little controversial. Alright, next card is Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis. 4 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker. A -1, up to 2 target creatures you control get +2/+1 till end of turn. -2, create 2/1/1 human soldier creature tokens. -3, gain 5 life. And it has an escape cost for 6 and exile 4 cards. Not a fantastic card. It's cool that you can recur it. You're basically paying command tax anyways when you escape it. Plus, you have to exile cards from your graveyard. So the first time you escape this thing, it's actually more expensive than just recasting it. And it only goes down. You can't keep this thing on the battlefield to keep generating value. It's obviously not really designed for this format. I'm going to stick it in... I don't want to be a Debbie Downer about this card, because I do like this card, but I'm going to have to stick it in F tier. There's no reason to play this card. Nothing that it does is that impressive. Speaking of not impressive, Elspeth, Undaunted Hero. This is one of the, like, Planeswalker deck commanders or something. And you can tell. 5 mana, 5 loyalty, 2 white cheese. +2, put a 1/1 counter on each of the 2 target creatures, which is, like, okay. -2, search your library and or graveyard for a card named Sunlit Hoplite and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain flying +X/+X, and Rex your devotion to white. So this cares about your devotion, but you want to ultimate it. The math this works out. If this doesn't get attacked, you technically have at least 3. If you get to ultimate this, this card is not good. You can only really do the minus once in this format, so the minus is useless, and that card's not even very good. And the +2 is fine, but not amazing, and the ultimate's pretty useless. I'm gonna have to stick Elspeth, Undaunted Hero in the F tier. Don't play this card. Alright, next up, Eowyn, Lady of Rohan. At the 3 mana, 2/4. At the beginning of your combat, target creature gains your choice of first strike or vigilance until end of turn. If it's equipped, it gains first strike and vigilance instead. And equip abilities you cost 1 less to activate. Again, not impressive. Doesn't do enough. Gonna stick it in D tier. No reason to play this. Okay, next up, Evra, a 6 mana, 4/4 lifelink with the ability to exchange your life total with Evra with its power. This could be cool if you get it to work. This is way too janky. Stick it in F tier and move on. Alright, next up we have Faramir, Field Commander. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, draw a card. Whenever the ring tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Faramir, Field Commander, as your ring bearer, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So you need to be triggering
the ring tempts you, and if your stuff dies, you get to draw cards. This is like fine. It's a little below rate as a 4-mana 3/3, so that's not very exciting. This is another. I'm gonna go ahead and stick this in D tier. Not awful, not fantastic either. All right, coming up next, we have Frodo, Determined Hero, a 2-mana 2/2, so a grizzly bear. Whenever Frodo enters the battlefield or attacks, you may attach target equipment's control with mana value 2 or 3 to Frodo. As long as it's your turn, prevent all damage that would be dealt to Frodo. This is a lot better, I think, than the last couple of equipment commanders that we just talked about. Not that I'm going to put it super highly, but the fact that it immediately gets it gets to ignore the equip cost entirely, not just have it reduced, and that it basically gets to attack for free every turn is huge. I think if you're going to be playing an equipment deck and you want this as your commander, it's pretty solid. I would still want to play like a multicolor equipment commander over this, but this I think is good enough. It's going to land in C tier. Like I said, we'll get to some of the multicolor creatures for equipment when we get to like Boros that I think all outclass this. But of the mono white ones we've talked about, I think this is the best. Next up, we have Gandalf the White. 5 mana for a 4/5 flash. You may cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. If a legendary permanent or an artifact entry or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This card is cool. It's not really that good, though. This card reads better than it plays. I'm going to stick it in C tier. You need a lot for this to get going. It's fine. Like, waiting to get to 5 mana, then starting to do your value-y things once this thing is already on the battlefield is kind of not fantastic. It's going to be either C or D. I don't think it's F tier, because I think it's just good enough to avoid that at least. But I'm going to go ahead. I'll be nice to Gandalf. I'll stick Gandalf in C tier. I can't promise that I'll be as nice to this Gandalf, though. Gandalf, White Rider, is a 4-mana 3/3 with Vigilance. Whenever you cast a spell, creatures you control gain +1/+0 end of turn and scry 1. Whenever it dies, you may put into its owner's library 5th from the top. I mean, casting spells to pump the squad isn't bad. I did just kind of trash this commander. This one honestly isn't that bad. But doesn't really do that much outside of that. Being a 4-mana 3/3 is like, it has Vigilance, but that's not like amazing. The Scry one is kind of negligible a lot of the time unless you're really chaining a lot of spells. Like, this is something you want to play and then cast a lot of spells with and then attack with. Actually, might be okay. I'm going to stick it in C tier. Alright, here's a pretty cool commander. We got Galma the Shaper, a 3-mana, 1 white, 3/3, with Vigilance. Whenever it attacks, conjure a card named Tempered Steel into your hand, then creates a colorless 1/1 mirror artifact creature token. Okay, so Tempered Steel is an enchantment that reads, it is a 3-mana enchantment, 1 white, artifact creatures you control gain +2/+2. Every time it attacks, you get this effect and a little 1/1. Not thrilled about that. It's a big man investment. It is a self-sustaining engine, which is kind of nice. It attacks, so you get a 1/1, so you get to buff it, so it and it is an artifact creature, so it is able to buff itself, but it's a very mana intensive to do all that, and yeah, this card's alright. It's not amazing. It is a lot of mana, but it at least is a self-sustaining engine. I'm going to go ahead and put this in C tier, at least because the card is self-sustaining, and you don't need to have a lot going on for it to work, and it does have a fairly high ceiling if you can pull it off. Alright, next up we have Giada, Font of Hope, a 2-mana 2/2 with Flying and Vigilance. Each other angel you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it, for each angel you already control, and as another ability, tap, add a white mana, spend this mana only to cast angel spells. Angel Tribal, not great, usually, but I think Giada really makes that strategy work, being a mana dork out of the command zone that is able to both attack and buffs all of your angels that come down and helps cast them. for only 2 mana. So for that reason, I'm actually going to put this in B tier. I think this card's actually pretty good as a commander. Not blown away, but pretty good. I think it's worthy of B tier. All right, next up we have Gideon Oathsworn. 6 mana for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. Whenever you attack with 2 or more non-Gideon creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. Pretty decent static. Until end of turn, for its +2. Until end of turn, it becomes a 5/5 white soldier creature that's still a planeswalker. Prevent the damage that would be dealt to it. And for a -9, you can exile it and each creature your opponents control. Don't play this. This is another one of those planeswalker commanders. Like it can do a lot with its static, but a 6 mana 5/5 attacker that sometimes buffs your stuff and can be attacked down by your opponents on their turn with a -9 that's like not the greatest ultimate in the world. Just don't skip this one. Don't play it. All right, next up we have Gideon Blackblade. 3 mana for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. As long as it's your turn, Gideon is a 4/4 soldier with indestructible that's still a planeswalker. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to Gideon Blackblade during your turn. +1 up to 1 other target creature you control gains vigilance, lifelink, or indestructible until end of turn. And it has a -6 of exile target permanent. This is a much stronger version of what we just went over, in my opinion. This is much, much better. In every way. It's half the mana. It gives a very good buff to either push or be able to block with vigilance or the lifelink. These are all very good keywords that it gives. And its ultimate is a little bit more achievable, I think. And I think also more flexible. For that reason, I'm actually going to stick this. This might be a little controversial. This might be another A tier. This is a really, really good aggressive threat in the command zone for 3 mana. Like, this can come down. I think this is the best aggro planeswalker commander, period. I think this is very worth trying to run in your command zone if you want. All right, next up we have Gideon of the Trials. It is a 3 mana, 3 loyalty planeswalker with a +1 of, until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal. It has a 0 ability with until end of turn. It becomes a 4/4 human creature token with indestructible that's still a planeswalker. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to it. And a 0 with, you get an emblem with, as long as you control a Gideon planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. All right, so we just discussed how good the last Gideon, Gideon Blackblade was. How does this stack up to that? I believe this had an absolutely like super good time when it was in standard. But this isn't standard. The last 0 where it says, oh, you can't like lose the game if you have a Gideon. You know, people, it's very easy to play around like being able to take care of Gideon in games and like kind of making that so it's not amazing. The +1 is like okay because it like I guess it protects itself. But overall, it's a worse attacker than the previous Gideon that doesn't add to your board. And like I mentioned, I don't think the last ability is actually that useful, specifically in Historic Brawl, because of how easy and like telegraphed it is to deal with commanders. For that reason, I'm actually probably just gonna stick this in C tier. Like, it's not a bad commander necessarily. Probably a better threat in the deck than a commander. And with me saying that, I'm going to stick it in D tier because I think it fits that criteria, actually. Okay, next we have Gisela, the Broken Blade, the other half of the meld combo I mentioned earlier. 4 mana, 4/3, flying, first strike, lifelink. Off to a pretty good start. At the beginning of your end step, if you own... Okay, yeah, if you own the other half, it transforms. So that's the problem with this card. It's got good stats, right? Flying, first strike, lifelink, 4/3. Very, very good stat line in keyword mix. However, all this thing does is meld, so you really need to have the other half already in play. Otherwise, this is going to get blown out with removal. And just playing this on its for its front side, well, it doesn't really do anything. So I wouldn't suggest running it as a commander. I'm actually going to go ahead. I'm going to stick it in F with the other half. All right, next up, we're going to talk about one of my favorite cards from this set, and I have built this commander before. God Eternal Oketra. 5 mana, 3/6, double striker. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 4/4 zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. Whenever it dies, put it or is put into exile, you put it into its owner's library, third from the top. A resilient card, right? You're probably not gonna have to pay commander tech super often, although getting it back is kind of slow. But the ability of, like, all you have to do is cast, like, get one trigger off this, and you have a 4/4 with vigilance on your team. It's so good. But it is a little bit clunky. Like, you know, a 3/3 double strike is pretty good, but it is 5 mana, so that's probably not the best rate even for a double striker. I think if you get 1 or 2 triggers off this, though, you're probably just winning that game. So if you're able to pull it off, it's nice. I'm going to stick it in... I'm going to stick it in B tier. I really do think it's better than all the C tiers we talked about. And it's probably a little bit underexplored at the moment. Alright, next commander. Go Shintai of Shared Purpose. 4 mana, 1/3 with Vigilance. Already pretty bad. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay 1 if you do. Create a 1/1 colorless shrine creature token for each shrine you control. So this wants you to have a lot of shrines and pay mana to make more shrines. And that's it. You just make more and more shrines, which you can't run that many other shrines in this deck because it's only mono white. This is trash. I'm sticking this in F tier, and we're going to move on. All right, next up, Grandmaster of Flowers. A 4 mana, 3 loyalty planeswalker. As long as it has 7 or more loyalty, it is a 7/7 dragon god creature with flying and indestructible, which is awesome, by the way. +1, target creature without first strike, double strike, or vigilance can't attack or block until your next turn. And another +1 with search your library or graveyard for a card named Monk of the Open Hand, which is like a 1/1 that if you cast it, if it's the second spell you cast this turn, it comes in with a 1/1 counter. And then if you search your library this way, shuffle. Actually, no, maybe it's when you cast your second spell. Regardless, doesn't do anything. You can literally only use one of its pluses a single time, and it doesn't get a creature that's that impressive. I think the other +1 is pretty useless, and it doesn't do a good enough job of defending itself. Grandmaster of Flowers. There's no reason to play you. You're a pretty bad card. I'm going to stick you in F tier. There's no way you're ever turning into a dragon, like ever. All right, next up, Halvar, God of Battle. Creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped at double strike, pretty good. At the beginning of each combat, you may attach target aura or equipment attached to a creature you control to target creature you control. So you get to kind of change, you get to swap where one of your equipment or auras are, which is pretty good. The other side is a 2 mana equipment that gives like +2/+0, and I think if it dies, you return it to your hand. Solid card. Decent equipment commander, but not the best. I feel like I've said that a bunch of times. I'm going to put this in the same tier as our boy Frodo. I think it's about the same strength. Having the flexibility of like being able to move your stuff around, making one of your creatures you control, and making all of your equipped and enchanted stuff have double strike is super powerful. And if you really need equipment, you could just cast it for the equipment. I think that's very good, and it's good enough to get C tier, but not much better than that. Okay, next up, Heliod Suncrown. 3 mana for a 5/5 indestructible creature. It is also an enchantment. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature, so it's just an enchantment. Whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. Pretty good. 1 in a white, another target creature you control gains lifelink till end of turn. Now, I mentioned earlier that I think there's really only one life gain commander that I think is even like kind of okay, kind of playable. That's this. Heliod is really, really good versus Ragavan and similar decks to it. The fact that it both has, with the ability, it has an ability to help you gain life. And it makes your board huge because life gain decks are known, like you can get a lot of triggers off of life gain decks, and this stuff just buffs your board to the moon. That being said, it's not that good against much other stuff, but it's so good against more aggressive strategies that I'm like, maybe this is kind of okay. I don't know if I'm going to put this in C tier or B tier, though, because it is very good against aggressive decks, and it can catch some other archetypes off guard as well. Doesn't interact with combo at all. I think this is... Yeah, I think I'm going to put this in C tier. Alright, next up we have Icing Death Frost Tyrant. What a cool name. 4 mana, 4/4/3 flying vigilance creature. Whenever it dies, creates Icing Death Frost Tongue. A legendary white equipment artifact with equipped creature gets +2/+7 whenever equipped creature attacks, tap target. Defending creature that player controls, or target creature defending player controls, and it is equipped too. So it exists to die and get a sword that is like okay but not amazing. Now this is a limited card. This is not a commander card. I would not play this in this format. F tier. Next up we have Isamaru, Hound of Konda. It is a 1 mana 2/2. That's it. That's all it does. That being said, not the worst card we've talked about. Probably not by a long shot. The fact that it is just a very cheap and very well-rated threat right out of the command zone is, not nothing. But then again, you would never play this over. Like, having this turn 1 every game is, like, fine. But I think you'd rather have access to something much more powerful out of your command zone. For that reason, yeah, this is going into the D tier. Makes it into a lot of decks. Not a good commander on its own. Alright, next up we have Catilda, Dawnheart Martyr. 3 mana for a XX, or sorry. Flying lifelink, protection from vampires. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of permanents you control that are spirits and or enchantments, with a Disturb 3 that basically is this. It is an enchantment for 5 that gives something +1 or +X with the same spirit. X is equal to the number of spirits or enchantments you control. I believe it also gets flying and lifelink as well. This is an interesting commander. It wants you to play a kind of enchantress deck in mono white, and if it dies, you get a very, very good enchantment from it. That being said, not a great commander. Not enough enchantments support, I think, in these colors. Not at least for Catilda. Like, we're gonna get to another commander that just does this thing's job way better than it. I think so. I'm gonna go ahead and stick this in. I think you can make it work though. I'm gonna stick it in C tier. Okay. Next up, we have Kemba, Ka Enduring. 2 mana for a 2/2. Whenever it's or another cat enters the battlefield under your control, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to that creature. Equipped creatures you control get +1/+1, and for 5 mana, you can create a 2/2 white cat creature token. So it immediately comes down and gets an equipment attached to it, which gives it and your other equipped creatures a buff. Plus, it can make white cat creature tokens for you. This is a very good limited card. However, don't think it's quite good enough. Like, this is another equipment D tier commander. Okay, next up we have Quendi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Quendi, Pride of Femeref. 4 mana for a 2/2 double striker. Creatures you control with first strike have double strike. F tier. The first strike tribal is not good. And this is only a format. This dies to so many things. No. Get out of here. Be gone. You're bad. Alright, next up we have Landraval, Horizon Witness. 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer with whenever 2 or more attacking creatures you control attack a player, target attacking creature without flying gates flying till end of turn. Bad rate for a 3/4 flyer. And it's nice that it gives another thing flying when it attacks, but that's not really good enough to be a commander, is it? Is it for 5 mana? Yeah, stick you enough. I don't think you're playable. Next up, we have Lena, Selfless Champion. A 6 mana 3/3, not starting off good. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white social creature token for each non-token creature you control, so that's pretty good. Sacrifice it. Creatures you control with power less than Lena's power gain indestructible till end of turn. So it is a 6 mana, like, army in a can if you have an army already that can buff things smaller than it, but it's a 3/3. It is less than, so yeah, all your creatures with power 2 or less unless this thing has a buff somehow. Yeah, not good. It looks it might read like it's good, but I think in practice, if you know you already have to be kind of ahead for this thing, or not ahead, you already have to have a pretty established board for a 6 mana card to do anything, and it might not even protect all the stuff you want to protect if you sacrifice it. For that reason, I'm probably gonna have to stick it in. Ooh, might be controversial. I'm gonna throw this in F. I don't think you should play this card. All right, here's a good one. Light Pause, Emperor's Voice. Whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with mana value less than or equal to that aura with a different name. Then each aura you control, put that card on the battlefield, attached to Light Pause, Emperor's Voice, then shuffle. Okay, this is very good because all the auras you're running in Historic Brawl is a singleton format anyways, so you only have one. This is so good. I'm actually kind of torn if I want to put this on A or S tier. I think this might be one of the only S tier commanders for mono white. Like, it's so good. It's very good at fighting like protection auras, and like, you know, if you're playing this deck well, you're gonna have a very good win rate with it, I think. You can like, there's so many, like, this is one of those like for the toolbox nerds out there who like to play those toolbox decks. Like, this is something you probably love because you just find whatever you need for whatever situation. It's just so good. Oh, it might be S tier. I do feel like it's a little bit above these two. I think I'm gonna put it in S tier. Alright, next up we have Linden, the Steadfast Queen. A 3 mana for a 3/3, all white pips, by the way, with Vigilance. Whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life and get slapped in the F tier. All it does is gain life. Doesn't even gain that much life. It's nice for triggers, but yeah. Not good enough on its own, I think. You know what? I did say F tier. I'm actually going to stick this in D tier. It is at least a 3 mana 3/3 of Vigilance. Okay, next up we have Lauren, Disciple of History. Whenever Lauren, Disciple of History, or another legendary creature enters the battlefield under control, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. It is okay. It is, you know, it doesn't do that much. Like, it's good value if you want to play both artifacts and legendary creatures, but I think you kind of, you know, muddle your deck. You really have to strike the right balance for this to really work. And for that reason, I'm just going to stick this in D tier. Alright, next up we have Linvala, Keeper of Silence. 4 mana for a 3/4 flyer. Activated abilities of creatures your opponent's control can't be activated. F tier. This often does absolutely nothing. You wouldn't want to put this at the head of the deck for any reason. Alright, the next Lauren, Lauren of the Third Path. Legendary creature, Human Artificer, 3 mana for a 2/1 when it enters the battlefield. Destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, and you can tap it for you and your opponent to draw a card. This is another like good constructed like 60 card. Not a great commander. Rex Sage in the command zone is like fine, but you'll probably get some hits for it, but I wouldn't suggest playing it as a commander. Okay, next up we have Lyra Dawnbringer, a 5 mana 5/5 with flying, first strike, and lifelink. Good start. And other angels you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. Pretty good ability. Unfortunately, is absolutely outshined by Giada as the angel commander. Good beater, good in angel decks, not a good commander though. For that reason, Lyra, I'm gonna have to stick you in. You're a good enough command zone presence, I think, to be a C tier. No, I don't think stats alone will do it. I'm going to have to stick you in. Alright, next up we have Mangara, the Diplomat. A 4 mana 2/4 with lifelink. Whenever an opponent controls attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. So this wants to be like a mono-white, mid-range-ish, control-ish, weird. Good in Commander, not good in Historic Brawl. Don't think this is going to be doing anything impressive anytime soon. So, it's a D tier you go. Next up we have Mavinda, Student's Advocate. A 3 mana 2/3 with flying, with an ability, pays 0. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only once each turn. So this thing says once a turn, you get to recast something like a, like a little buff or a protection spell from your graveyard. It's fine. I don't think the strategy that this card is trying to pull off is very good. It's not consistent enough, needing a good mix of aggressive threats as well as the kind of protection / pump effects and combat tricks. It's a cool card that I think unfortunately just isn't good enough. I'm gonna have to go and stick this in D tier. Alright, next up we got Maverin Fane, Dusk Apostle. 3 mana for a 2/2 that reads, whenever one or more non-token vampires you control attack, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So this can come down and immediately add to the board if you already have like a 2-drop vampire that attacks. But it is in mono white. Mono white vampires are pretty weak. You really want to be in black and or red now, right? Like, yeah, black or red to really make the vampire deck shine. And because this isn't just a mono white tier list, inevitably it'll be more, right? Comparing this to other colors. This is just not playable, unfortunately. I'm gonna have to throw it down in F tier. Okay, next up we got Mikaeus the Lunarch, X1 for a 0/0. Mikaeus the Lunarch enters the battlefield with X1/1 counters on it, so the more you pump into it, the bigger it gets. You can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can tap it to remove a 1/1 counter from it and put that counter on each other creature you control. So it turns your 1 counter that you put on it to a whole bunch of counters if you have a big white board. This is a really cool card. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a very good card. It's a lot of mana. That you need to pump into it to get more than one activation off of it. You could just be like putting 2 mana into it, so pay 3 mana, and over the next 2 turns you pump your squad twice. I don't think that's that impressive. I don't think we have the tools in our format to support this kind of like 1/1 counters shenanigan kind of stuff, especially not in mono white. Because of that, unfortunately, as cool as this card is, I'm going to have to slap this in F tier. I don't think this is playable. Alright, Mondrak, Glory Dominus. 4 mana for a 4/4. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, create twice that many of those tokens instead. And then 1 and a white Phyrexian, white Phyrexian. Sacrifice 2 of the creatures or artifacts you control. Put an indestructible counter on it. Doubles your tokens. Can sacrifice your stuff to make it indestructible to make it harder to remove. Pretty good. Not amazing. If this lands and you have that 1 mana open, it's pretty easy for these kinds of decks to already have. Like, normally I'm like, oh, you gotta have a board built. But you really only need to have like 2 things on the battlefield, even if they're minuscule, for this thing to come down and make itself very hard to remove, which I think is a big plus. And then from everything you have from that point in the game, this like indestructible 4/4 is just going to be doubling the value of a lot of your spells that you're casting, while your opponent struggles to find a way to get rid of it. I think for that reason, it definitely dodges these lower tiers here. But I still wouldn't rate it too highly. You could still blow this out. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in C tier. Alright, next up we have Myrel, Shield of Argive. 4 mana for a 3/4. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. And whenever it attacks, create X1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens or X the number of soldiers you control. So basically, this kind of does like the Granko thing where it taps to like double your goblins. This attacks to double your soldiers, which is cool. And it even shuts down your opponent from interacting with you on your turn. The unfortunate thing about that is it doesn't touch board wipes. A lot of the best ways that like control decks want to deal with Myrel is, not on Myrel's turn anyways, but and 4 mana is a little bit late for an ability like that to be coming down. But I still think it's good enough to consider, like, at least C or B tier. Like, if you want to really helmet aggro deck, or a soldier tribal deck in mono white, you could definitely do it with this and I think get away with it. I think although it's a little weak in some departments, I think it's a little slow. I think, it's still probably good enough. Like the ceiling and the floor of this is still probably good enough to put it in. Ooh. I might be overrating this because I really like casting spells on my opponent's turn. I'm actually going to go ahead and stick this in B tier. I think a lot of creatures are like accidentally soldiers and you get to run a lot of good cards in this deck. Alright, next up we have Nadar, Selfless Paladin. 3 mana for a 3/3 vigilance. Whenever it attacks or enters the battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeon. Which I'm not going to go into the dungeons. It's a whole bunch of stuff that you can get a lot of value out of over time if you venture a lot. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed the dungeon. Classic D tier. It is cool. This card does cool stuff with the venturing thing. It can get you a lot of value over the course of the game. But that being really all it does, I don't think that makes it kind of worth it as a card to run as a commander, so I'm going to stick it in D tier. Alright, next up we got Norike Yamazaki, the Poet. 3 mana for a 3/2 vigilance. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may cast target enchantment card from your graveyard this turn. Classic. Where are you at? F tier. Samurai tribal plus or warrior tribal plus enchantment stuff. I guess it wants to play like auras and stuff. I don't think this is a playable card. Next up we got Audric, Lunarch Marshal. 4 mana 3/3. At the beginning of at the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn. If a creature you control has first strike. The same is true for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, skulk, trample, and vigilance. So it basically lets all your creatures share each other's keywords. This is cool. This isn't really good though. This is kind of a gimmick. You could build around it if you really want, but I'm not a believer in this card. I'm going to throw it in F tier. Don't play it. Okay. One of the newer commanders on the list, Osier Talk, Deepest Foundation. I don't know if I said that right. 6 mana for 6/6 vigilance. If one or more creature tokens would be created under your control, 3 times that many are created. Instead, when it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transform under its owner's control. Okay, so what the land does is it is legendary, it taps for white, and you can pay 3 and tap it. If you attack with 3 or more creatures this turn, you get to transform it back into Osier Talk. That's what the land does. So 6 mana is a lot. It is nice that if it gets removed, you still get a land out of it, so you're always up in the exchange. However, as powerful as tripling the number of tokens you can create are, I don't think that's that much better than doublings. So I'm going to put this in D tier. It's too expensive for its cost, and I think I'd rather just have the 4 mana doubler. I think it's just a better rate. Like, it's, removal resilient, kind of, but I think Mondrak just absolutely outshines Osier Talk in every way. Next up, Catcher the True. 4 mana, 3/6, double strike, indestructible. It can't attack or block unless you control at least 3 creatures. Play 3 and a white. Create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. All around, it's actually a pretty solid card. I'm going to go ahead and stick it in C tier before I really get to explain myself. It's good. It's not great. It can't really do anything unless your board is up and built, but it can also add to your board. I think, good, not great. You can make this work though. C tier. Okay, next up we have Oswald Fiddlebender, a 2 mana 2/2. You've probably seen this guy in Hell queue a couple of times if you play in that queue. Magical Tinkering, pay 1. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, search your library for an artifact of the card with mana value 1 equal to artifact card. With mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. Artifact, toolbox, combo deck. Some people play Paradox Engine, One Ring, all that fun stuff in an artifact deck. In mono white. Despite being mono white, though, very, very good commander. Very, very solid commander. I would suggest trying this out if you haven't. It's definitely one of the more powerful options. Minimum, I'm going to say minimum, it's an A tier. We're looking at minimum A tier. I'm going to put it top of A tier. Arguable, you could arguably put this in S. I just do think Light Paws is a little bit better. Light Paws does a much better job of protecting itself when it wants to execute a similar in some ways, but overall fairly different game plan, being much more aggressive. But Oswald, very, very strong. Can't go wrong with picking Oswald. Okay, next up we have Redain, God of the Worthy, a 3 mana 2/3 flying vigilance creature with no lands your opponent's control, enter tapped. Most of the time that's useless text. Sometimes it comes up though. And non-creature spells your opponent's cast with mana value 4 or greater cost 2 or more to cast. The flip side of this is the Valkyra Val. I don't know how to pronounce that. Protector Shield. If a source and opponent control will deal damage to you or permanent you control, prevent 1 of that damage. Whenever you or another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, that controller must play. Controller of that spell or ability must pay 1, or it's countered. This card, I feel like this card simultaneously does a lot of little things, but ultimately is not greater than the sum of its parts. It not good enough in any really one department, I think, to be worth the head of a deck. But I think the shield comes in handy in a lot of matchups, especially aggro matchups when you want to just absolutely like dunk on their board. So I'm gonna stick you in D tier though. Don't maybe C tier. Nah. I'm gonna say D tier. Not really worth running as a commander at all. Okay, next up we have Rosy Cotton of South Lane, a 2-mana 1/1, not good. When it's the battlefield, create a food token. Whenever you create a token, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosy. So it comes down, makes a food, buffs a thing, and every time you make tokens, you get to buff your things. This card is... Look, I'm sure there's some stuff you could pull off with this card. The fact that it doesn't make tokens on its own, you need a lot of stuff for it to work, and it only makes your stuff like a little bit bigger. It's fine. It's not amazing. This is D or F, and I'm kind of torn on it. I'm going to stick it in D. It at least pumps your board. And pays you off for playing the game. Okay, next up. Samwise the Stout-Hearted, a 2-mana 2/1 with Flash. Whenever Samwise the Stout-Hearted enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target permanent card in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn. Put it to your hand, the ring tempts you. So it kind of like rebuys something that dies, which is fine, but when you see this coming, this card's not really that good. And again, not actually a good commander at all. There's not really much synergy other than maybe trying to play mono white flash that you would want to have with this deck. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick you in F tier. Okay, next up we have Saradoc, Master of Buckland, a 4-mana 2/4. Whenever it enters the battlefield, whenever Saradoc or another non-token creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1. Tap 2 untapped halflings you control. Saradoc gets +2/+7 against lifelink till end of turn, and it creates halflings. This is another one where I'm like, sure, it is fine, but it's just not a good commander. Don't play this as a commander. Halfling Tribal? Nah, miss me with that. F tier. Alright, next up we have Safara, Sky's Blade. 7 mana for 7/7. You may pay white and tap 4 untapped creatures you control with flying rather than pay the spell's mana cost. It has flying and lifelink. The creatures you control with flying have indestructible. So, man, mono white flying tribal. When you get to do this, it's so good. You get to tap all your stuff, give them indestructible, and have a 7/7 lifelink around the battlefield for only 1 mana. But you need to tap 4 creatures to do it. I've seen this get pulled off before. I've prevented this from getting pulled off many times. Sorry, Safara. I'm gonna have to stick you in D tier. I think it's more of it's a meme and a dream, but I don't think it's ever gonna be a reality that you're like a viable deck. All right, next up, Serra Benevolent, 4 mana for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, +2 creatures you control gain flying and +1/+1 till end of turn. -3, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. -6, you can enable them if you control creature. Damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. So if you have a creature, it kind of prevents you from dying to combat damage. This is another one where it's like, it's kind of good. It's a little underwhelming. The fact that it, like, if you, like, curved out 1, 2, 3, this is a great, like, 4-mana spot in the curve. If you just go 1, 2, 3, play this, and then all your stuff is getting buffed and flying every turn, like, if you're just playing this for the +2, the +2 is really good. And the fact that it goes to 2, so it's effectively 6 the turn it comes down, or 1 with a 4/4 flying legendary creature into play, it's like, it's pretty good. I'm actually going to go ahead and stick this in C tier. I think you could definitely build around this if you really want to. Alright, next up, Sigrid, God Favored. 3 mana for a 2/2 with Flash, First Strike, and protection from God creatures. Whenever it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target attacking or blocking a creature token until it leaves the battlefield. Not a commander. Not meant for commander. Not going to put it in. I'm not even going to put this in D tier. It's a kind of remove a spell in the command zone that your opponent sees coming from a mile away. And for that, I'm just going to stick it in F tier. Don't play this as your commander. Skrelv, Defector Mites. 1 mana for a 1/1 with Toxic. It can't block, but you can pay a Phyrexian White to tap it, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color till end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. Not exactly protection. Some ways a little better, sometimes worse. But where does this lie on the tier list? Why would you have this as your commander? You're playing this to have easy access to the other threats in your deck. And Skrelv is almost always a very good. I think Skrelv is a better Isamaru for a turn 1 play that you always want to have. I think that lands Skrelv in C tier, but I really wouldn't want to have Skrelv piling its own deck. Okay, next up we have SRAM, Senior Edificer. Whenever you cast 2 mana for a 2/2, whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Simple, sweet, pretty effective, a little susceptible to removal if you're not, smart about the way you play them. You can play this like turn 3, turn 4 with mana open to immediately get a trigger off of it to get your value. And from there on, this is almost a better support card than it is for as a commander, which, as I've stated previously, might land it in D tier. I really do think this card is a lot better than that, though, because of the value that it provides you from just playing your basic strategy. It's close to B tier, I think. Just because it triggers off of so many things. And I do think it's a little bit better. I do think it's a little bit better than the creatures. But is it better than this, though? You know what? Yeah, I'm going to stand by that. I'm going to stick it in B tier. The value for it is just really, really good. You're going to be able to grind out a lot of matchups with SRAM. Okay. Next up, Sir Alan, the Lion's Claw. 5 mana for a 4/4 First Strike. Whenever it attacks other creatures you control, gain +1/+1 till end of turn. Slow rate is okay for a 4/4 First Striker. 5 mana isn't fantastic. Don't think the effect is like that good. There's much, much, much better commanders to run in that spot. So much so that I'm actually gonna stick this. Would I rather have this or Linden? It's probably the same. I'll stick you in D tier. You know what? No. She's at least 3 mana. Go back down to F tier. 5 mana is not worth that effect. Alright, next up. Taranaka, a Crowan Veteran. 3 mana for a 3/3 Vigilance. Whenever it attacks, another target creature you control or gets base power toughness plus 4/4 and gains indestructible. So it can buff like one of your 2 drops to be stronger when it and that creature attacks, right? And it untaps it. So it's like pseudo vigilance and indestructible plus a buff. Which is okay. Like, this isn't Standard Brawl. I feel like this is a much better card back in its time in Standard Brawl, but this isn't Standard Brawl. This is regular, like, Brawl or Historic Brawl, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think it does enough. I don't think that effect is strong enough out of the gates to really helm a deck. I'm going to stick this in D tier. Next up, we have Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle. 3 mana for a 2/2 flying. Whenever you cast a Historic Brawl, return target creature with a mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. There are cool things you can do with this, don't get me wrong. It falls kind of flat, though. Being only a 2/2 when it enters the battlefield is pretty bad. I'm gonna go ahead and stick this in probably C tier. I think it's better than these, because it can do a lot of things. I think it is better, definitely better than these cards that I mentioned, because it does have a lot of value stapled to it, but I don't think it's good enough to really breach any farther than that. Okay, next up is Teo, Aegis Adept. 4 mana for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. +1 up to one target creature's base power perpetually becomes equal to its toughness. Perpetually gains, this creature can attack as though it didn't have defender, so it turns your walls into much better creatures. -2, conjure a card named Lumbering Light Shield out of the battlefield. Which, unlike the other, like, search your library or whatever stuff for, that it just keeps doing that. Okay, so Lumbering Light Shield is a 1/4 that says when it enters a card in your opponent's hand, it gets perpetually 1 more to cast. So it's a very annoying wall that taxes a card in your opponent's hand. Its ultimate reads, when you get an emblem with the beginning of your end step, return target white creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, you gain life equal to its toughness. So this is big butts, big toughness tribal. In mono whites, there are some decent walls in mono white, not enough to make this thing good, even though it does kind of create its own. I am just gonna go ahead and slap this in F tier. I wouldn't play this. It doesn't seem good enough. Alright, next up we have Teo, the Shield Mage. 3 mana, 5 loyalty. You have hexproof. -, create an 0/3 white wall creature token with defender. This does very little. You having hexproof isn't that good, and coming down and just making 2 walls, and that's all it does for the whole game, is pretty bad. So, F tier. Goodbye, Teo. Alright, next up we have Thalia, Guardian of Fraven. A 2 mana, 2/1 first strike. Non-creature spells non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Cool. Honestly, like, A tier. I know I'm usually not super high on these kind of tax effects out of the command zone, but Thalia is, like, it attacks pretty well, it blocks pretty well because it has first strike, and the non-creature spell thing is just such a big headache to deal with. I might be overrating this a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and stick Thalia in A tier. Now, for the next Thalia, Heretic Dar, 3 mana for a 3/2 first strike. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. This is an annoying effect. It's more impactful than it reads, usually. However, I am going to stick this card in C tier because I don't think it's quite annoying enough to really herald a deck on its own. Next up, the Eternal Wanderer, a 6 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker that reads, no more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat, which is a very relevant line of text. +1, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control, the beginning of that player's next end step. This can be yours or your opponent's. 0, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike. -4 for each player. Choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. Now, I've been very, very low on these big, expensive planeswalkers throughout this tier list. I do, however, think this one is very good. Everything about this planeswalker is good and plays into the kind of, I guess this is more leaning like mono white control, less mid-range. But it's really leaning into that strategy. It protects itself very well. 2/2 double strikers are not nothing on the battlefield. They do matter. Even late in the game, they can matter a lot. The ability to just to +1 and just keep either blinking one of your own things to keep getting value from it, or just absolute like stopping your opponent's best creature from being able to attack is also huge. Or you could also just have like a pseudo board wipe and just nuke your opponent's board and keep your best creature. And you get to choose the creature that they control too, so that you could just like make them keep their worst creature, you keep your best creature, you wipe the board, and you're like way ahead from that exchange. Also, like I mentioned, the top line of text for its static ability is super powerful because usually planeswalkers have this issue of you play them onto a board and they attack it with everything and it dies. You didn't really get a lot of value from it. The Eternal Wanderer is really, really good at evading that kind of scenario, not just with its static, but with its ability to create blockers and wipe the board. For that reason, I'm not going to put this in A tier. I don't think it's that good. It is still a 6 mana planeswalker. I'm going to slap this in B tier though. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about the Wanderer, a 4 mana 5 loyalty planeswalker that says prevents all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control. So like red burn spells get upset at you. I don't know. -2 exile target creature with power 4 or greater. It's not bad, not great, but not a good commander. I'm not going to elaborate more. Get slapped in F tier and we're going to move on. All right, finally, our last Emperor of the day, the Wandering Emperor. 4 mana for 3 loyalty Planeswalker. We're all probably very familiar with this card if you played it in constructed format on Arena. Flash, as long as it enters the battlefield this turn, you can activate it. Its abilities at the time you can cast an instant. So as soon as you play it on your opponent's turn. +1, put a 1/1 counter on a creature against first strike. -1, create a 2/2 samurai with vigilance. -2, exile target tap creature. You gain 2 life. Well, I think this is a very good card, and you could put this as kind of like a mid-range or control kind of deck, like pilot, commander, whatever. I'm losing my mind. There's too many of these. I don't really think there's any reason to run this. This card gets much, much weaker when your opponent sees it coming. I'm actually going to put this, as good of a card as this is, I'm going to put this in D tier. Okay, next up, Tomic, Distinguished Advocist. 2 mana for a 2/3 flyer. Lands on the battlefield, and land cards and graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponent control. Your graveyards can't play land cards. Okay, so this stops land shenanigans. That's all it does for a 2/3. That is not really a relevant effect 99.9% of the time. Don't play this as a commander. F tier. Goodbye. Okay, next up we have Vladimir and Godfrey, a 3 mana 3/2 with a ability called Rejuvenation. A 3 mana, 2 and a white. Return Vladimir and Godfrey from your graveyard to the battlefield. Tapped, it perpetually gets +1/+1. Activate only if you control a 1/1 creature. Cool. More of a kind of constructed card. I don't think this is a great commander. You can get it back and make it bigger, but it's a lot of mana, and you might as well just be playing like better threats out of your command zone than trying to keep this on the battlefield. I'm gonna throw this in D tier. All right, and final commander. I know it says we have 2 more down there still. That's just because I shouldn't have put them on here because they're not mono white. Zatalpa Primal Dawn. 8 mana, 4/8, flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, indestructible. What else do I need to elaborate? This card doesn't do anything and it's 8 mana. It's cool, but that's it. F tier. Goodbye, Zatalpa. Stop being reprinted in every single like commander set and like random reprint set. Very annoying. Anyways, this is it. This is my mono white tier list. I finally did it. I've been here for quite a while. Because of that, I hope you like it. I hope you stayed and you watched to the end. Hello to everybody who stayed and watched till the end. Please annihilate me in the comment section if you think my opinions are bad. I'm down for it. I love it. I want that engagement. And I'm always open to have discussions about Magic with people, even in the pit of hell that is the YouTube comment section. All right. With this list being concluded, I hope everybody had a great day. I hope you liked the content that I made for you. There will be more coming, hopefully next week. I don't know when exactly this is going to be up. I wanted to have this up on Friday, but I have to get the editing done and I have other things to do today, so we'll see. With that being said, farewell and have a nice day.